Good morning, Magic. I'm Gavin Verhey from Wizards of the Coast. And in Adventures in the Forgotten Realms, there is plenty of die rolling. Now, I talked with Corey about this previously, but since then we've seen the entire set and the commander decks, which feature other kinds of dice that you roll as well. What exactly is the story here? Well, let's dig in today. When it comes to Dungeons and Dragons mechanics, a few might instantly pop into mind. Character creation, storytelling, and of course, die rolling. It has been an element of D&D since the very beginning. You probably don't know this, but early on in exploring the design of Adventures in the Forgotten Realms, we did a lot of user research with focus groups of D&D and Magic fans. We showed them cards and tried to gauge what felt like D&D without feeling too out of Magic. Lead vision designer Andrew Veen later told me that he felt this was the single most valuable exercise for the set. There were about 20 or so of these cards, and the cards ranged from the very tame, for example, just a flavorful card with a D&D type, like a tiefling, all the way to the extreme, like a card which said armor class 15 on it, a dragon that when it died said consult a certain page of the Dungeon Master's Guide and then roll on the loot table there, and a card that even said roll your die, then consult a DM to see if target creature is destroyed. There was a lot of wild stuff tried out. But amidst all of the wild stuff, a few things began to become clear, and one of them was that die rolling could work. Thanks to years of unsets, we knew die rolling wasn't too complicated and did have its fans. So it began to be tested. Through the very long design process, the team found a few things. They discovered the most fun ranges, leaned into extra effects for rolling a critical hit on your die, and decided ultimately that the main set would only use a D20. And that made a lot of sense. The D20 has become the most iconic D&D die, and is rolled in D&D as a default for all matter of checks, attacks, and initiative. Although, fun fact, that D20 system only appeared starting in 2000 for 3rd edition, quickly becoming an iconic default for D&D as well as many other games. It made a ton of sense for the die to use here. But what about the other dice? The D4, D6, D8, D10, and D12. They were just getting left out in the cold. So, in part at the recommendation of R&D mastermind Aaron Forsyth, we looked to get cards that rolled the other dice into the commander decks. We started with the idea that each deck would have one or two different kinds of dice to focus on, but ultimately found that the design space for these was a lot more limited than it sounded. When you're just consulting a chart, what made these different than the D20 cards? A card which asks you to roll a D10 and then checks for 1 through 4, 5 through 9, and 10 is just a D20 rolling card in disguise. And to top it all off, they had the potential to be very swingy and decide a lot on a single dice roll. We needed to solve both of these questions. And that's where lead designer Glenn Jones came in. He found two main solutions. The first was that we didn't actually need to use charts for these. We could key off of the specific numbers rolled, like you see on Bag of Tricks or Bucknard's Everfull Purse. It made them feel different from the D20 rolling cards. It wasn't just the same chart those cards used, but scaled down. The second is we found ways to mitigate the variance. For example, there's a cycle of cards where you add something to your result, which helps you set up the stronger effect. Another cycle has you rolling 2 dice for 2 effects, and then choosing which effect gets which number. That way, you get 2 shots at a high roll for the effect you want. So we playtested them a bunch, and it ultimately worked out, and stuck in the commander decks. It was a nice solve to a tricky problem. One thing I do want to note, because I've been getting a lot of messages on it, is that we didn't get dice into the box this time for a number of reasons, but we're definitely keeping it in mind for if we do this kind of thing again. So thanks for all the notes on that. In the meantime, there are a ton of ways to roll dice, whether in our companion app where you can roll a d20, or by simply Googling roll a dice, and you'll have all of them at your disposal. So after a lot of work, all the D&D dice did end up in this set after all. Unset fans chalk up another innovation that appeared in these sets before being added to mainstream Magic. Nice work, Mark. So what do you think about rolling dice in Magic? Do you like it? Do you dislike it? And how do you feel about all the different dice you roll in those commander decks? Well, let me know in the comments down below. I'll talk with you again soon. And in the meantime, may you roll the highest number you can on your dice. You got this. Permanents with phasing were a failure. They were weak, confusing, and not that fun. But could it have been that all those years ago, the Mirage design team was actually onto something with the spells? It was a great way to temporarily deal with creatures. And unlike creatures with phasing, which prompted a ton of rules questions,